Federal government will fund and conduct phase 3 trials on 3 different experimental vaccines over the next few months. Now, those vaccines coming from Moderna, Oxford University, and AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. The aggressive timetable suggests earlier trial phases have been successful. Our colleague Carlo Versano recently spoke with the top doctor at Johnson & Johnson about their vaccine candidate and asked what positive results they've seen so far. Take a look.
Yeah, we have done a lot of preclinical, so non-human primate studies where we have shown with the vaccine, and first with the several candidates, then with the selected vaccine, very significant immunogenicity, good immune response in those animals. And that gave us more and more comfort to very quickly determine which of the vaccines we would brought forward. And in parallel, then, we were able to accelerate the clinical material, the GMP produced material for clinical trials, and that altogether now, in discussion with the regulators, led to an accelerated start of clinical trials.
Can the public take that to mean, Doctor, essentially so far so good?
Well, so far so good. It's a massive amount of parallel work which is ongoing in different types of animal models, but also in the laboratories to show that the vaccine is safe, that is effective in animals, that we have good ground to start clinical work. We also can build on a very significant number of other vaccines we have done with the same vector, the same vaccine platform. We have done RSV, HIV, Ebola, and Zika. And every time we were able to go from the lab to the animal and showed very good immunogenicity, very good immune response, and from the animal to humans. And so it's quite predictive when you construct these vaccines that if you have good animal data, you will have good human data. Now, of course, we always have to prove it, but it bodes well for the success of the vaccine.
I want to talk about this story that was in the Wall Street Journal this week, that the government here in the United States wants to start phase 3 efficacy trials of their the 3 most promising vaccines that they believe to be most promising. That they want to start those trials this summer, yours, of course, being one of them. Now, these phase 3 trials usually last somewhere between 1 and 3 years. But Johnson & Johnson has said you guys expect your vaccine to be ready by early 2021, at least for emergency use. Is that still the timeline you're working on?
Yeah, it's still the timeline we're working on, but it's very dependent on the incidence of the transmission. So we have to be able to find areas where there is still between 1 and 3% in the general population of transmission. And that is more and more difficult. So we need to find the places in the world, in the US and then in the world, to see where we can do that study. Such a study will take more than 30,000 people. It could go up from 30 to 100,000. But the higher the transmission rate, the faster we can see the endpoint and we can prove efficacy.
What's your take on human challenge trials? We've talked about this on our show here. It's been in the media a lot, this idea of young, healthy people volunteering to essentially contract this virus in the hope that they can speed up the trials. That's something that you guys are looking at Johnson & Johnson?
Well, we are following the field very closely, but it's not that easy. So first of all, you need to have a good standardized virus. And for that being tested, you have to validate the model first. And that will take several months, as well as it's still very risky. COVID can be very bad disease for young people, too. So we think as long as there is no good therapy, whether it's an antibody or a drug, it will be too risky to do it, as well as the validation will probably take as long as doing a clinical trial. So that's why we at the moment focus on the clinical trial.
When you have an approved vaccine, obviously that's just half the battle when you're talking about having to vaccinate, hundreds of millions, potentially even billions of people around the world. What are you doing to ensure that you can scale production of this thing if and when it's ready for showtime?
We have 2 things. One is the cell line, which is a highly productive cell line for vaccines. And in a 1,000-liter vessel, we can produce more than 150 million vaccines a year. And that is now even higher in the current with COVID. And then that type of vessel, we are multiplying multiple times to get capacity. So at the moment, we predict that we can get north of 1 billion vaccine dosages in the course of 2021, and even much more afterwards. So it's 2 things. It's optimizing biology and creating capacity in additional vessels, which brings us there. Mm-hmm.
Because it used to be, I mean, at least with the flu vaccine, that they had to do it in, they had to basically replicate the virus in eggs, right? So you're a long ways from that, presumably.
Yeah, we're a long ways from that. The cell type of production has been worked out very well. Several vaccines have been produced on that, and it's very well validated. So that helps us now tremendously to generate a huge number of vaccines in a very short time frame.
Doc, before I let you go, I do want to sort of pick your scientific brain, if you will, and get you to weigh in on the broader pandemic. I'm curious what you and your colleagues, both at Johnson & Johnson and just in the scientific community, have learned in these last 5 months studying this virus, and what might be useful to tell the public just for if and when the next pandemic comes around.
Well, I think we have learned that we have to have much more public health measures in the world on measuring, on diagnosing viruses sooner. The necessary platforms to do early diagnosis are there, but were not developed to the level that they can deal. Nobody expected such a pandemic happening, at least not the general public. We have seen several viruses like Ebola, like Zika, like SARS 15 years ago, but nowhere, of course, to what we see today. So public health measures, early diagnosis, ready-to-use vaccine platforms, and much more basic science on virology to be able to have many broad spectrum medicines available, which could tackle several of these viruses. And I'm sure that this will become a new scientific space after we are after we are done with COVID-19, and we hope that we have to never go again through this because of developing new science.
And that was Cheddar's Carlo Versano speaking with Johnson & Johnson Chief Scientific Officer Paul Stoffels.